Wellington has always been very important to Trade Aid, not just because it's the seat of government. You were always the top shop, and I believe that you still are. People like Marion, Jim Kebble, and I see Richard Norman, and Diane Hinari, and I saw Mary Bush somewhere. You came to the first shop conferences, and I remember they came en masse and they sat in the front row. And it didn't always work, but it was very powerful, and they were very influential. I recall the opening of a new shop, I think it was in Cuba Street, and it was memorable to me for two reasons. The first was that it was opened by the Foreign Minister, Warren Cooper. And as I recall, there weren't terribly many people there, probably because it was a very small shop. But despite that, he didn't say a few platitudes and jump in his ministerial car and hurry off to a diplomatic cocktail party. He stayed and made a proper speech, and I really respected him for that. And it actually also gave rise to a rather good article in The Listener by Helen Pask. And there was a photograph of me that I thought was quite good. Fiona asked me to say a few words about the early days of Trade Aid. And as you can imagine, that opened an absolute Pandora's box of memories. When we returned from India, a whole lot of groups asked us to go and speak to them. And one of them was the annual meeting of the National Party for the St Albans seat in Christchurch. And in passing, I mentioned that I had tried to get an import license to bring in Tibetan carpets, and I'd been declined. And do you know, within a week, a license was sitting in my letterbox. That was quite an interesting way of learning. And you know what that lot of carpets led to? A marvellous educational tool throughout the country, which is still operating. At the same time, having found that we couldn't import, we thought if we set up a not-for-profit shop, a business, it just might work, and we might get some licenses. And so Ron O'Grady from the National Council of Churches, who'd been our sponsors in India, and I got together a group of people, and as Bob Considine put it, on one side of the table, committed, respected, skilled city business people, and on the other side, wild, wide-eyed, idealistic, well-travelled revolutionaries, pumped full of liberation theology. It was a creative tension. And in it, I think we still try and keep that kind of mix. And of course, we were all men, except Vi. And the minutes of the first meeting in October 1972 in my law office library suit reads, "In the absence of any suggestions as to suitable candidates for the office of Minutes Secretary, Mrs. Cottrell agreed to be Minutes Secretary in the meantime." And I think she was Minutes Secretary for about 20 years. And actually it was interesting, at that very first meeting, we decided to form an incorporated society to show that nobody was personally benefiting. And we decided on a name. And Vi recalls that she was making tea with her back turned, and she suggested the name Trade Aid, which of course we have, and that was the first meeting. And you know, after that, we met every 2 weeks for 1 hour at lunchtime. We brought our own lunch, and we worked out the things over the period. It was really exciting. Everybody attended regularly, but actually Vi did most of the work. And I have to tell you, I would draft an annual report or something, and then I'd give it to her to rewrite. But initially, we saw ourselves selling to established shops. But somewhat unexpectedly, there were groups like Every Little Body that required product. And so they were driven. And by 1974, 50% of the sales were to such shops. And so the movement grew. And I recall Bob Considine, who was the Corso organiser in Christchurch at the time, a very lively fellow. He resigned when the sales reached $100,000 because he thought it was getting too much like a business. Now the sales are in millions. And of course we've even now got our own trade aid, it's not ours, a trade aid chocolate factory called Sweet Justice. We should really be asking Jeff White, who's here, the general manager, to come and talk about it. And finally, Rye reminded me of a wonderful ad that one of the shops used. They meant to say exotic crafts made from recycled bicycle parts. But what the ad said was erotic crafts made from recycled bicycle parts. Best of luck for the next 20 years.